December 21st, 1949. A boy is born in Yako, Upper Volta, a French colony. His name is Thomas Isidore Noel Sankara. 37 years later, on October 15, 1987, he would be assassinated. 42 years after that, his assassins would finally be convicted. In between, in just 4 years, he would transform a nation from poverty to dignity. He would inspire millions across Africa and the world. He would become what people call Africa's Che Guevara. But unlike Che, unlike most revolutionaries, Sankara didn't seek power. Power sought him, and when he got it, he did something nobody expected. He became uncontrollable. This is the story of the man who dared to choose clean water for all over champagne for a few, and it cost him everything. And if you want more stories about revolutionaries who dared to challenge empire, subscribe to the channel now. Because history is not written by the powerful. It's written by those who dare to imagine a different world. Thomas Sankara was born into privilege in a colonized land. His father was a gendarme, one of the few Africans employed by the French colonial state. This gave the family status that most Burkinabe didn't have. But privilege in a colonial context is a contradiction. It teaches you the lie that your people deserve less. It teaches you that Western education is superior. It teaches you that France is civilization. Sankara excelled in school, brilliant in mathematics, fluent in French. Priests encouraged him to join the seminary. His parents wanted him to become a priest. The church wanted to domesticate his brilliant mind. Instead, at age 17, in 1966, he joined the military academy. Not for power, for something more dangerous, for the tools to imagine a different world. In 1970, he left for officer training in Madagascar. And there, in Madagascar, everything changed. He witnessed something revolutionary. He watched students and workers rise up. He watched them topple a government. He watched people discover that the system isn't inevitable, that it can be changed. He returned to Upper Volta transformed. Not just a soldier with a vision. In 1976, he helped form something called the Communist Officers Group, a secret organization of military men who believed that revolution was necessary. That Africa could not be saved by reforming colonialism. It had to be destroyed and rebuilt. In that group, he met Blaise Compaoré. They became friends. They became brothers in ideology. Neither man knew that one day, Compaoré would betray him. By the early 1980s, Upper Volta was chaos. Military coups, labor strikes, hunger, corruption eating away at the state from inside. In November 1982, yet another military coup overthrew the government and placed a coalition body called the Council for the Salvation of the People, CSP, headed by Major Jean-Baptiste Ouedraogo, in power. Because of Sankara's immense popularity, immense charisma, and heroic military track record, the CSP selected and appointed him as Prime Minister in January 1983. A man of integrity in a government of thieves, they thought they could use his grassroots appeal to gain public legitimacy while continuing their status quo. Instead, Sankara used his new platform to aggressively push a radical, anti-imperialist agenda. He openly aligned himself with revolutionary global figures, publicly meeting with leaders like Cuba's Fidel Castro and Grenada's Maurice Bishop. Domestically, his fierce anti-colonial rhetoric and blatant alignment with pro-Libyan elements, fueled by his close relationship with Muammar Gaddafi and their shared radical ideology regarding African self-reliance and unity, deeply alarmed the conservative, pro-French factions within the CSP governance. Tensions reached a breaking point on May 14, 1983, when Sankara gave a massive public speech that strategically lasted until dusk, intentionally running into the time to break the Ramadan fast. This effectively drained the crowd and completely humiliated President Ouedraogo, who was left with no audience for his own speech. 2 days later, on May 16, 1983, a French national security advisor met with President Ouedraogo. Immediately following the meeting, the conservative faction purged the government. Within weeks, Sankara was imprisoned, arrested, dismissed from his post, and detained under heavy guard by the military regime under charges of treason and factionalism. But here's what they didn't understand. Sankara had spent years preparing for this moment. He had spent years building relationships with radical military officers. They were waiting. And on August 4, 1983, after a tense period of imprisonment and house arrest, a coup erupted. But it wasn't Sankara's coup. That's the crucial point. That's what makes his story revolutionary. The coup was organized by distinct military officers, radical men who believed in revolution. Men like Blaise Compaoré. They weren't fighting to put Sankara in power for his sake. They were fighting because Sankara represented something they believed in. They overthrew the government. They freed Sankara from prison. They offered him the presidency. And they expected him to be grateful. They expected him to be their man, their instrument. They had no idea they were unleashing a force they couldn't control. Thomas Sankara became president and personally chose to rename the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, land of the upright people. He wanted the country's very name to cast off its colonial past, carry deep indigenous meaning, and reflect a true African identity. It wasn't because the name just sounded nice. It was because he was declaring a fundamental shift, a new nation for a new people. And then he did something nobody expected. He didn't consolidate power. He didn't reward those who brought him to power. He didn't play the game of politics. We must choose between champagne for a few, or safe drinking water for all. That was his philosophy. That was his revolution. He looked at the government Mercedes fleet. He sold them. The official state car became the Renault 5, the cheapest car in the country. Ministers would drive themselves. No chauffeurs. He looked at high government salaries. He cut them. His own salary was reduced. Ministers were forbidden first-class airline tickets. The government was forbidden to live in luxury while people starved. He said, "He who feeds you controls you," and so he rejected foreign aid. No more Western loans. No more IMF conditions. No more selling his country's resources to foreign corporations. Instead, he launched an almost impossible campaign: self-sufficiency. Make Burkina Faso feed itself. In 3 years, wheat production rose from 1,700 kilograms per hectare to 3,800 kilograms per hectare. The country went from famine to food security, not through foreign aid, through the mobilization of the people. He said, "Every decision will be made by Burkinabe, planned by Burkinabe, executed by Burkinabe." But Compaoré, the man who had brought him to power, was watching. And he was realizing something troubling. They couldn't control him. But the most revolutionary thing Sankara did might have been the simplest. He prioritized education. When he took power, Burkina Faso had a 13% literacy rate. 13%. In a country of 7 million people, 6 million couldn't read. He launched a nationwide literacy campaign. He declared education a weapon against imperialism, against colonialism, against oppression. By 1987, just 4 years later, the literacy rate had reached 73%. Schools were built in remote villages. Teachers were trained. School children were vaccinated against meningitis, yellow fever, measles. 2.5 million children vaccinated in weeks. He said, "Education is how you decolonize minds. Education is how you make people understand their own power." He appointed women to government positions, the first African leader to do so. He outlawed female genital mutilation. He outlawed forced marriage. He recruited women into the military. On March 8, 1987, he gave a speech to thousands of women. He said the revolution was upsetting the relations of authority between men and women. He said women's empowerment was necessary, formidable but necessary. He was doing in 4 years what most countries hadn't done in 4 decades. He was proving that another Africa was possible. In 1984, Thomas Sankara welcomed a visitor to Burkina Faso, a legendary musician from Nigeria. His name was Fela Kuti. Fela was the king of Afrobeat, a man who had spent decades fighting imperialism through music. He had been imprisoned, harassed, beaten. Like Sankara, he believed African liberation was possible. They became friends. They understood each other. Fela said publicly, "Sankara is the only African leader to have embraced me and my music. The only one." Sankara was a musician too, a guitarist who played jazz. He would perform for state visitors, sometimes with Blaise Compaoré, his vice president, singing beside him. Then, in 1987, Sankara was assassinated. Fela was devastated. When he learned of Sankara's death, his response was, "Why on my birthday?" October 15th was Fela's birthday, the day they killed Sankara. And so Fela did what he always did with pain. He transformed it into art. He wrote a song called Underground System, not a simple tribute, an explanation, a warning, a prophecy. When one good man want rise for Africa today, bad leaders dem go one finish am. Fela sang about the network of corruption, what he called the underground system, through which African leaders conspire to destroy anyone who threatens the status quo. He named them Nkrumah, destroyed; Sekou Touré, destroyed; Ben Bella, destroyed; Lumumba, destroyed; Sankara, destroyed. And he made a profound statement: "You can kill the man, but you cannot kill the idea." October 15th, 1987. Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. A coup erupts. But this time, it's not to free a prisoner. It's to murder a president. Blaise Compaoré, the man who had brought Sankara to power, leads the coup. He comes with soldiers, and they kill Thomas Sankara, and 12 others with him. For 27 years, Compaoré ruled Burkina Faso. For 27 years, he blamed the overthrow on necessity, on economic crisis, on Sankara's authoritarianism. For 27 years, the world moved on. Then, in 2021, 34 years after the assassination, a court in Burkina Faso finally opened the case. They called Compaoré to trial. In 2022, after months of testimony, the verdict came: guilty, complicit in murder, sentenced to life imprisonment. 34 years later, justice delayed, but not denied. But by then, Blaise Compaoré was in exile in Ivory Coast, safe, protected by France, who had always been uncomfortable with Sankara's independence. The evidence suggests France was involved. The Nigerian regime under Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida was involved. There's an underground system, just as fella sang, that protects the men who kill revolutionaries. Thomas Sankara lived only 37 years. He held power for only 4 years. In those 4 years, he transformed a nation. He renamed it. He fed it. He educated it. He healed it. He empowered women. He planted 10 million trees to fight desertification. He built roads and schools and hospitals. He made his country independent. He said, "While revolutionaries as individuals can be murdered, you cannot kill ideas." Sankara's body is dead, but his ideas live in every African who believes liberation is possible, every woman who demands equality, every student who fights for education, every activist who refuses foreign aid, every person who chooses clean water for all over champagne for a few. In 2025, Burkina Faso reburied Sankara in a mausoleum. They called him a hero of the nation. They declared October 15th a national holiday. And in 2024, young military leader in Burkina Faso Ibrahim Traoré invoked his name as they took power themselves, promising to continue his vision. The revolution wasn't over. It was just interrupted. Sankara proved something simple and radical. Another Africa is possible. Another world is possible. Not through foreign aid. Not through imperialism. Not through the betrayal of radical colleagues. But through the people. Through their power. Through their refusal to accept the world as it is. And if you want more stories about revolutionaries who changed history, about men and women who dared to imagine and fight for a different world, subscribe to the channel now. Because the revolution continues, and history will be written by those of us bold enough to transform it. Remember to organize, resist, and be unbreakable.